Hello, everyone, and welcome to School to Startup, a conversation series where we explore how universities and educators around the world are shaping the next generation of innovators, thinkers, and founders. I am Tanushi, Senior Program Manager at University Programs at Tracxn, where we work with leading universities globally to make startup innovation and intelligence accessible to students, faculties, and researchers. Tracxn in general is a private market data intelligence platform for which, in case if you want to deep dive into startups, industries, investors, investments, if this is what you are likely to be a part of, Tracxn is where you can go to. Today, I'm thrilled to be joining by Krithika Randhawa, Associate Professor of Strategy, Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and ARC Research Fellow at University of Sydney Business School. Kritika's research focuses on how organizations make strategic decisions when adopting, commercializing, and scaling innovation, especially around emerging technologies. Her work beautifully connects academic insights with real world entrepreneurial impact. Professor Randhawa, thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Tanushi, for having me, and big thank you to the entire Tracxn team for this kind invitation.
Lovely. To get started, Professor Randhawa, we want to understand how has been your journey so far. Can you let us know how did you land upon entrepreneurship, and how are you driving these kind of strategic decisions within the business school that you are in right now?
Sure. So when people ask me how I ended up as an academic and also being associated with innovation and entrepreneurship, I often say that it's been more of an exploration of a journey rather than a straight line. So my journey actually began in India, where you are located right now. And in my past life, I was a hotelier. So I worked with ITC Hotels, that you would know it's a flagship company in India. And I was part of the pre-opening team for a few of their flagship hotels, the ITC Grand Central and ITC Grand Maratha, both in Mumbai. And I was largely managing the accommodation operations for these hotels. And this past experience really grounded me in service management and operations, revenue management, and those sort of the realities of leading people and, working with managing revenues and all that, making those decisions under constraints. Now, fast forward, my husband and I moved to Australia. We were basically first-generation migrants, and I pursued my long-time dream of doing an MBA. I did that at Macquarie University. That really opened my mind up to the idea of management from a more research, from a theoretical, from a more strategic perspective. This worldview of also across global landscapes of how firms can compete and how they can evolve. So towards the end of my MBA, I became involved in a rather large-scale global research projects, and I was at the University of Technology, Sydney. And these are commissioned by Australia's Department of Industry, Innovation and Science in collaboration with the London School of Economics and McKinsey. The main idea was to really benchmark management practices in Australia's manufacturing sector as well as healthcare, along with global peers. So as I was conducting this, what started off as a few-month project at the end of an MBA turned out to be more than 3 years of working intensively as a researcher. And I started to realize how much I actually enjoyed being a researcher and this whole intellectual craft of doing research. So that led me to doing a PhD in innovation management. I focused on this concept of open innovation, which I'll talk more about in today's conversation. But since then, there's really been no turning back. I've really been focusing a lot on this idea of innovation ecosystem, digital platforms, and really thinking about how business models can shape entrepreneurial trajectories. It's really sort of where a lot of my current thinking and work has been. And as you also pointed out, I work very hard to situate myself in the in-between space, as I'd like to call it. So bridging academic research into the world of teaching and also engaging with industry practitioners. And this blend is what I'd say really keeps me energized, because research informs practice, and teaching really pushes students to do something that's impactful, and industry engagement is all about, for me, it's all about testing theory in the real world.
That's really inspiring, Professor Randhawa, and I really like the entire path that has come together, which has blended the research and the real world application for you, and also adding on to it the kind of experience that you have had with ITC hotels, and which led you to join this kind of strategic sort of education stream right now, right? So here, since we mentioned that you are very much inclined towards open innovation, can you tell us what exactly is that, and if there are any exciting projects that you're working with? Really intrigued to know about it.
Absolutely. So yes, my current research and engagement portfolio sits within this large overarching theme of open innovation, which is largely a phenomenon which we increasingly see in today's world, where organizations collaborate and share knowledge across boundaries with external stakeholders, with an intention to co-create innovation and entrepreneurship. So largely, my current ongoing projects are focusing on a few, I'd say about 3 or 4 themes. First is this concept of innovation ecosystems in a digital technology context, and specifically this idea of what I term industrial data ecosystems and platformization. This is, in fact, the central anchor of my Australian Research Council project, the fellowship that I'm currently undertaking, which focuses on how we can govern industrial data ecosystems. So if in organizations in largely traditional, highly regulated industries like manufacturing, healthcare, and so on, when they want to start to digitalize, how do these companies go about doing that? And also, importantly, a core component of this is that you need to share data, and people are generally quite hesitant when it comes to sharing data. It's not as tangible as some of the other assets. So I'm really focusing on how can we come up with trusted governance mechanisms so that organizations feel more comfortable about sharing data in a secure way, and that we can preserve trust, but we can also make them competitive by unlocking this concept of open innovation for them. So alongside, I've been working on B2B, the platformization, which is largely where the organizations are now moving very much from traditional organizations to platform, or, based on the digital technologies. So here the choices are really around how do you create the modularity, like how do you make sure that these platforms are interoperable so that you can actually share knowledge and data. That makes all the difference. For example, with my PhD student, we've been studying Siemens, which, as you know, is a large German engineering powerhouse. And however, over time and increasingly now with their Siemens Accelerator platform, they're really transforming themselves from an engineering firm to a platform orchestrator, thinking about bundling how they can provide services and co-innovate with partners, both SME startups as well as large organizations, and to actually create more of like an advanced manufacturing scenario around industrial IoT, digital twins, and those sort of technologies. So that really leads me to the second stream of research. A lot of my work is now on digital technology adoption and how we can scale and commercialize, which goes directly into the world of startups, which is very close to the work that you do over there. It's really about how can startups think about scaling their innovation and go from lab to market, right? So one example is in health tech, where I work with engineering and some colleagues in my medical department, and we work on this idea of disability innovation or health tech, to think about how children. For one project, for example, is how can children who are disabled think about, how can we think about creating toys that helps them be able to create assistive technologies, but also a playful way in which they can learn and grow. Although, I mean, many of them are children with cerebral palsy, for example. I'm also doing some work with some Belgian health tech platforms, really looking at similar things, right? So it's really about how can we think about adoption pathways for these startups in healthcare technologies, regulatory approvals, clinical validations, payer models. How does all of this really come together? Similarly, in sports tech, a very different industry, but I find that in partnership with the Australian Sport Technology Network, we're really mapping those commercialization pathways for startups. For example, startups that deliver wearables, startups that deliver fan engagement platforms or athlete and analytics, those sort of paths. How do you actually match those sort of sport technologies with use cases and also with investors and other distribution partners? So related is this idea of corporate accelerators, which is another stream of research, right? So along with another former PhD student, William Page, I've been working on this idea of how can regulated sectors, large established organizations work effectively with startups. So the idea is to really form the right conduit between startups and these large incumbents, right? So William, in fact, is specialized in his entire doctoral research that I mentored was on this topic. And since then, he's founded a large startup. I mean, it's 1001, which is a leading video on demand, a streaming platform, which is really leading the space in the Middle East, applying this kind of research to real world ventures and to his own entrepreneurial pathway. Another current with a student, Naksha Netpredit, is sponsored by the Thai government. And we are really, along with her and the Thai government's interested in really understanding how can they do a good job of setting up what is the Eastern Innovation Corridor, Eastern Economic Corridor for Innovation, which is an innovation district set around emergent technologies. So they're really trying to build these platforms which brings together startups, corporates, academic entrepreneurs, local government, all of this to drive Industry 4.0 as well as decarbonization journeys. So another topic which relates to sort of the startup entrepreneurship space is crowdfunding, which is a phenomenon which is really picking up a lot of steam these days. So with my PhD student Zihui, who's just commenced her doctoral journey, we're really looking at Indiegogo, like, it's one of the most established crowdfunding platforms. How do founders really, craft their campaigns, and how do they use some rhetorical strategies in the way they present their campaigns as well as themselves in order to gain engagement from backers as well as investors and to secure crowdfunding? So the final sort of theme goes back to the work that I'm currently doing with colleagues in IIT Madras, in fact. So as I have a fellowship over there working together with faculty as well as a PhD student, one project, for example, looks on how can we think about developing business models and how can we institutionalize sustainable technologies in the building and construction industry. So people like L&T, Larsen & Toubro, and others, like if these kind of companies have to think about adopting sustainable technologies in their building and construction, what are the barriers to overcome, what business models, what pathways can we do? And I think that way I've been following what IIT Madras, the research park over there, and I know that IIM Bangalore has a similar research park as well. The School of Innovation Entrepreneurship, which is newly established in IIT Madras, they're doing a phenomenal job of really trying to think about how to structure commercialization of startups and this whole lab to market pathways, which I think is picking up a lot of traction in India. Similarly, we are also starting to work with another strategic partner for the University of Sydney, the University of Glasgow, So there I will have a joint PhD student scholars commencing soon. And with a colleague in the University of Glasgow, we will study how these sort of ecosystems emerge around these digital technologies, specifically to tackle grand societal challenges. So it's not just about commercial profits, but how can these kind of ecosystems be developed to advance the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So these sort of give you a little bit of an overview of the kind of projects that I'm currently working on, the topics. And these, to me, really give me like a front row seat to think about how theory and practice can really sort of co-evolve. And this is kind of what I personally believe is the exciting part of how universities can really make a meaningful difference in shaping some of these entrepreneurial ecosystems.
That has been quite a journey, Dr. Randhawa, because I think that you have not left any other sector to be working with. I mean, starting with health tech and then sports tech, and apart from it, also getting into the sustainability angle from the construction industry point of view as well, because that is one of a very emerging trend that we are also seeing while we are speaking to a lot of faculties and students. Sustainability is something that they are very eagerly diving into, not just the big corporates, but startups is also trying to flourish and ensure that a sustainability angle is added to their portfolio, right? So with all these kind of projects, I understand that that it's certain that University of Sydney and the research that faculties like yourselves are doing there is certainly helping out the founders of the new generation that are coming up and laying down the pathway for them. Where do you think that the other students would be beneficial by the university? Is there any kind of courses that are coming up, or is there any kind of specific programs that universities are doing to inculcate this kind of habit or behavior or mindset into into the folks who are driving entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is a very important area to focus on. And for me, based on all the research that I have been working on and the projects that I'm currently working on, for me, there are some of, like, I'd say some key trends that seem to be emerging, which I think is an opportunity for universities to think about how they have to position themselves, but also deliver entrepreneurial education. The first trend is obviously this shift towards platformization, right? So companies are not just offering products anymore. So they're really beginning to think about themselves as orchestrators of ecosystems. So this ecosystem thinking means that one needs to really think about how to create these shifts, not only from a technological point of view. Obviously, you need all of that. You need the technological networks and the modular services and the interoperability to make these work on a digital, in a digital sense. But in industrial domains, it also means a whole transformation of the organizational identity itself to go from a legacy firm into this whole, we are co-creating innovation and providing services. And here, the large organizations have the potential to plug into a lot of technology startups as well, right? So that is an important space. But it's easier said than done. There's very complex design challenges and governance challenges that need to be overcome. So a clear skill set that we need to think about developing in future innovators and entrepreneurs. The second trend I find is really about the bottleneck in scaling. So many ventures fail, not because their ideas are bad, but because the scaling pathways are fraught with challenges. So the regulatory compliance, the whole alignment of stakeholders around a collective value proposition, how do you actually access markets, especially for tech startups with these radically novel technologies. The AI and IoT sounds great and the technologically, But when it comes to actually finding use cases and then scaling those use cases in these kind of industrial sectors, I find, especially in my health tech as well as these sports tech projects, that there are several friction points to overcome for users and adopters to actually feel like, although they know that they can get value from these technologies, this transition is not simple. So we need to develop skill sets in this kind of socio-technical challenges, which rather than also the cognitive challenges of how to adopt and scale these kind of technologies, and how can startups become scale-ups and then grow into large innovators. The third piece I'd say is really around this convergence of industries, and so hence cross industry sort of innovation thinking, right? So because innovation today is largely not happening within one domain or with one industry. So you might have an artificial intelligence startup working with biotech, which is what I'm seeing in my assistive tech project. We see sustainability or themes in a construction company, but they have to work with a platform provider to actually allow for the data analytics as well as reporting required for sustainability and so on. So what this does is, and this whole, what I term is cyber physical integration, which means the cyberspace has to connect with physical realities in traditional manufacturers. That means having sensors in their factories, but also how do you actually make sense or do analysis of all that data? Goes back to the kind of work that Tracxn is doing, right? So how do you do intelligent analysis of all the data to actually turn them into insights that you can innovate from? So this is a different skill set, which we need to be thinking about providing to students. So I think universities should respond by firstly embedding experiential learning. So which I think a lot of us have been already doing right now, but to do this in a way that we are embedding these new skill sets in today's world, right? So giving students real startup problems and real sort of industry partnered projects rather than only providing them with theory, that's an important, like a basic foundational requirement, in my opinion. The second is really, how can universities really act as its own innovation lab? So rather than thinking themselves as just creators and providers of knowledge, how might we be able to think of universities itself as being like an incubator or an accelerator or a living lab even, right? So, and to be able to facilitate those kind of industrial shifts and partnerships enabling partnerships of startups with corporates through students and allowing students to turn into entrepreneurs, those sort of things. The other trend, which we've also been focusing a lot on, is this idea of micro-credentials or stackable courses, which allow options for busy professionals to think about lifelong learning. So this kind of digital transformation and new trends means that people have to keep upskilling themselves, but as busy professionals, how might we be able to make it easier for people? And options for students to actually become entrepreneurs, but do it as not as an extra to their university education, but do it as part of their, so which means how might we be able to design courses that actually give them credits for doing entrepreneurial work to actually build a startup as part of their university education. I think these sort of questions are fundamental shifts, that mindset shifts that universities have to start to think about. And also, of course, these global linkages, right? So with the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem, like University of Sydney has in India, we have IIT Madras as our strategic partner. We've got other global linkages around the world. But once you sign sort of these MOUs and these partnerships, how can we be more strategic in leveraging these cross-sectoral connections to help better entrepreneurial outcomes? So to allow students and faculties to not just do research across context, do academic research across context, but find a way in which we can actually help them learn from and also shape the entrepreneurial ecosystems across these sectors. So basically, in short, I think this boundary between academia and startup worlds is really blurring. And I see this in the University of Sydney. I see this in many universities around me, that we've all begun to realize that. But the most promising universities, I think, are the ones which would be able to help students, researchers, as well as industry partners to really co-create innovation pathways at scale. And I mean, I can talk to you about a few examples of how we do that, but I'll let you I'd let you ask if you have any further sort of questions about this before I move on.
Definitely. I mean, I would be intrigued to know what kind of, student-led programs are there, and projects that students have come up with, and what are you working on in these lines? Definitely. Please go on.
Yeah, okay. So let me start by talking about what we at the University of Sydney, what we've been working on. And this sort of gives a little bit of a flavor to what some other universities are also doing here in Australia. So in terms of your question around how are students really becoming entrepreneurial, and how are we in universities enabling that shift to happen, this is actually one of the most gratifying parts of my role. I mean, given I do a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation education for students, it's really fulfilling to see students actually convert some of those classroom ideas into real ventures. Or at least even spark that idea in them that, they can actually be entrepreneurs themselves, or, use this as a way to innovate large organizations even. So in the University of Sydney, we have two specific sort of accelerators that we have set up to enable this bridge, which enables this bridge to happen. One is Incubate, which is actually one of Australia's leading university-based startup accelerators. It has supported hundreds of startups till date. And it has created thousands of jobs. It's a really, really well established, in fact, ground up. It really came from a need felt in the ecosystem and set up by students. Following that, in 2008, we also set up another accelerator called Genesis. Genesis is actually housed within my discipline of strategy, innovation, entrepreneurship. And within the business school, it's also a flagship accelerator for University of Sydney founders. And so it's sort of the way you can think about it is Incubate is more like the incubator, whereas Genesis is really works with founders who already have some sort of an MVP, and they're really trying to accelerate that journey and connect to investors and thinking about ways to commercialize, scale, and grow their startups. So it's also been very, very successful. We also have the Sydney Knowledge Hub, which is really a place. It's a co-working space, but really meant for academic entrepreneurship, for academics to turn some of their ideas and take it from lab to market, again, to that sort of like deep tech and deep science research and commercialization pathways for that. So these are sort of three main pillars. All of these platforms have been able to we've been able to leverage those to bridge the classroom learning with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, for example, we have a major for innovation and entrepreneurship, which I have actually co-convened. And this in this major, students build on the core theories of innovation entrepreneurship, but they also move on to very hands-on projects. So, for example, in one of the courses that I developed, students take up startup projects working directly with founders from Genesis. And so they work over the 10 to 12-week period, the founders present a challenge to them, but they actually work together, almost like in a mini accelerator kind of mode. And the students develop solutions which they actually pitch back to their startups. And these have really assisted some of these startups over time a lot to give them creative ideas that do research that they might be constrained for time to do themselves. We also have launched something called the Startup Year, which is like a 4th-year advanced studies that students can take up, which specifically dedicates a year of their education to build ventures. So it is a new initiative backed by the Australian government to really help students see that clear pathway to entrepreneurship from their university education. So that's exciting as well. On the MBA side, for our postgraduate students, I'm currently actually designing an entrepreneurship course around like how do we think about innovation and creativity in our new MBA program, which is an MBA on technology and digital strategy, embedding real-world industry challenges around digital platforms, around commercialization, scaling, and all of that as project briefs. But broadly, I think what we are all working towards and we need to do more of is to champion this idea, as we said, of like, how can students start to build credits, right, for this kind of work. So in practice, I found that many of the undergraduate students and the MBAs who have pitched their ideas as part of these projects, as part of their courses, advanced into Incubate and Genesis to house themselves and actually go there for further support. But like I said, founders have also been able to come into the classrooms to tackle live challenges. So these kind of co-creation helps to deliver growth opportunities and helping students with a very authentic experience, but also sparking inspiration for them on how they can grow and think about entrepreneurship as a pathway.
Definitely. I mean, Professor Randhawa, this is amazing, first of all, because, the kind of programs that universities and University of Sydney is doing, it essentially is targeting the problems and driving it with solutions to the students, right? I mean, within this entire conversation, you have been able to highlight so many of bottlenecks, which I believe that can become a business model. And if any founder who is interested, will be able to pick up these gaps, build certain solutions out of it, and be able to, deliver solutions to the people who are looking forward to it, right? And also integrating, one very interesting part that you just mentioned was the integration of the 4th year, where they're given the particularly area of duration of 1 year, where they build up their own ventures, right? So that essentially is very intriguing, because 4 years time is a big time, time of a life for a student, right? And within that time, you're very energized and very excited about driving certain initiatives. And by the 4th year, when you come up and, okay, this is like the high time of my life, and then you're also building a venture, that's really interesting. I mean, I really love it, or to be honest. And I'm sure the audience who is there, who is listening to this, will have so much of insights from the kind of conversation that we're just having and the kind of insights that you have just said. I mean, that's really, really wonderful. So, with that, you have, sort of helped us imagine how universities and academia can sort of bridge the gap between entrepreneurship, and a good realization, is coming to the universities, because that's where the foundation of entrepreneurship happens, right? So, I think we are in the last leg of it. And before we end up this conversation, one very intriguing question that I would want to ask you is that, what would you want to leave behind, sort of an advice for the budding entrepreneurs or students who are looking forward to entrepreneurship? What would you say to them?
My first advice would really be for students and budding entrepreneurs to really stay curious, which I believe that it's I think we're living in very exciting times, but also very dynamic times, right? So very fast moving space. So what would really help is for students to not feel like when they're, especially when they're going through university, that they are looking for a clear and structured career pathway, either to become an engineer or a doctor, or for that matter get into management consultancy and so on. So it's not, and since the future is so uncertain, it's to not really chase what's hot now. It's more about trying to figure out about what the learning the skills of how can I learn and think deeply, how can I dig into why things succeed and why are things failing right now. So in terms of, and also resilience, right? So especially if students are considering entrepreneurship as some sort of like a career pathway, I think one thing to really learn is that that pathway is going to be full of setbacks. So it's not only for entrepreneurs, but in general now in this kind of a fast moving space, I think setbacks are part of life. So resilience sort of becomes non-negotiable as well. And over there, I've personally seen that building connections and building your tribe of peers, mentors, and connections with industries, and really helps you to sustain the blurry pathway sort of starts to get clearer and clearer when you actually work together. And the other advice that I'd like to leave is this idea of like blurring of industry boundaries that we talked about means that we have to learn early the skills of how to bridge the boundaries or break the silos, so to speak. So not wait until later to really think about how am I going to engage with industry or startups or government and so on, and really think about how can I learn from problems that exist today and think about curating career pathways by solving some of those problems, and how can I use the theory that I'm learning today to practical solutions. And so it's sort of really getting into that space of let me roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty and start to solve problems. I think that kind of learning is very useful. And also this embracing of interdisciplinarity in the mindset, and how can I work across boundaries, combine domain knowledge as an engineer or an IT student or professional. How can I learn to work with law professionals to learn more about regulatory compliance issues, or business researchers, students, and professionals to learn about how can I set up easier governance and adoption pathways. I think that sort of crossing the boundaries sort of learning is going to be very instrumental in changing the landscape of how we learn. And the final piece is really to focus on the impact and not the metrics. I think we need to be, both as students as well as professionals, and today's world very much fixated on KPIs, like how are we, meeting those kind of metrics. In fact, startups are also sort of looking for clear outcomes, right? Like investors are looking for those metrics as well as a way to kind of legitimize and have trust in when they're backing some of their founders. But the real question we have to always keep in mind is, what are we doing? What are we trying to achieve from what we're doing? How are these ideas really creating collective and sustained value? And if all of us, be it ventures, large organization investors, everyone starts to think of this as a collective value creation pathway, I think the journey will become clearer and easier. So yeah, those would be my pieces of advice. So the skills that students and founders, budding founders, need to be building in today's day and age is very different to how we thought of it a few years and a decade ago.
Exactly. I mean, with all the kind of advice that you have given. I'm sure students, faculties, even for that matter universities will be looking forward to it, and we really want to see these kind of insights getting into action, and actually driving and thriving in this kind of ecosystem that we are currently living in. So Professor Randhawa, this was a very thoughtful conversation, and in a very insightful one as well. So it's been a pleasure to hear your perspective, your experience on innovation, and how you are actually putting up ideas into execution, and thinking about a lot of these things, and driving ideas is very easy. I mean, everybody does it, but putting it into execution is what it matters. Knowing about your projects, knowing the kind of impact that you're creating with your expertise and with your connections with your students and the folks in industry, that really tells that you're living the story that you're telling, basically. So that was very interesting to know, and I'm sure people will be quite amazed to have that kind of insights. So thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to interview you and know about your experience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tanushi, for inviting me to this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I do believe that forums like School to Startup, this initiative that you have launched over here, is a great way to create that engagement between academic researchers, founders, students. And this is an important piece of the puzzle, right? Like the conversation about how can we eventually shape and shift the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So thanks to you for pushing the boundaries there.
Thanks a lot. I mean, we're always there, and pleasure meeting and speaking with you. And to everyone listening, this was School to Startup, where we bring you insights from faculty, innovators, and educators, reimagining the way we learn, teach, and build. Until next time, stay curious and keep building. Thank you so much.